There was a boy named Dan. He grew up in a humble family. His father was a shoemaker and had worn the same old pair of shoes for many years. One day, Dan's school announced a parent-teacher meeting. Dan felt uneasy. He didn't want his friends to see his father wearing his worn-out shoes and old work clothes. "Dad, you don't have to come if you're busy," Dan said softly. His father looked at him and smiled. "But I want to be there, son." The day of the event arrived. Dan stood at the school gate and saw his father walking in. His father was wearing his usual worn-out shirt and those same old shoes, stitched over and over. Dan's friends started whispering and chuckling. Dan felt his face heat up. Embarrassed, he avoided his father's eyes and walked away without saying a word. His father stood there watching his son, his eyes filled with understanding, but also a hint of sadness. That night, Dan came home and saw his father working on a pair of shoes. He noticed his father's rough, calloused hands and the same old shoes placed beside him. His mother walked over, placed a gentle hand on Dan's shoulder, and said softly, "Do you know why your father never buys new shoes for himself?" Dan shook his head. "Because every year he saves that money to buy you new shoes instead." Dan felt a lump in his throat. He looked down at his own shoes, new, clean, perfect. Then he looked at his father's shoes, patched, worn, yet still carrying him forward every single day. The next morning, as his father was about to leave for work, Dan walked up to him. "Dad, can I help fix your shoes?" His father paused, looking at his son with surprise, and smiled warmly. Dan picked up a needle and thread. He didn't really know how to sew, but today, he wanted to fix his father's shoes, even just a little. A parent's love isn't always spoken in words, but it's in the little sacrifices they make for us every single day. And sometimes, we don't realize it until we're old enough to understand.